how much of thought and effort has gone through in all of it. There's a short film which Rahul wanted to play, but it's also playing in the Patna City of Museums Gallery. And since we are short of time, we have not played it here. But please do visit that gallery, because then you'll get an idea of how they've approached it, what's happening to Patna Museum, and how things are going to be coming up. So now we're going to come to the culminating session of the symposium. It's about reimagining museums, and we've got two speakers from very different backgrounds. We've got Dr. Jahnavi Phalkey, who is the founding director of Science Gallery, Bangalore. Among other things, she's the historian of science who used to teach at King's College London, and then she moved to set up the Science Gallery in Bangalore. She's been in India for about 5-6 years, and she's taken this model, which is an international model, and she's looked at how it can be adapted to India, and she'll be presenting more about it. Zameer Basrai, who happens to be an architect, also besides being a researcher and a visualizer, is a session which is more on provocation for all of us. And he has, specially for the symposium, looked at virtually imagining how museums can begin. And I will allow him to present his session more. I won't reveal more. But I'd invite Jahnavi first, and then we'll have Zameer.
So as Batul mentioned, I started on the Science Gallery Bengaluru project about a little over 5.5 years ago. And very early on in my journey, I in fact met Rahul at a conference in Delhi, which led to my asking him to come and look at our project plans, because the architects were appointed before my appointment as the director, which led to further discussions and eventually led to us asking Batul to come on board. So the process went backwards for us. The museum planner came post facto. And I think as we move towards opening our building, at least those of you who have been, those who have been familiar with what happened in the early stages will see what a big difference the fact that Batul and Supriya came on board and helped us recover the museum-like structure of the project. And so in a sense, we owe a lot to some people in this room. And ever since Batul came on board, of course, we've been hearing about you, Mr. Singh, and it's a pleasure, of course, to meet you in person and to have the opportunity to present this project in what hopefully are the very last days of it being between few people, but now becoming truly a public institution. So I thought I would start by just making a couple of points about technology, but let me hold on to that. I'll come back to making those comments a little later, after I've spoken about the nature of the project or the nature of the cultural institution that we've set out to do with Science Gallery Bangalore. And I'll speak to the technology aspect when I speak more to the future aspect of this project or the session and the goal of this session. So let me start by telling you as much as I can and as quickly as I can about this project. So we are a part of an international network of galleries. We are 7 of us across the world at this moment. 4 of us in Europe, 1 in Australia, 1 in the United States, and 1 in Mexico. Now, 6 of these galleries, which is aside, leaving Bangalore out for a moment, these galleries are located on university campuses. They are owned by universities. And the goal is to bring artists and scholars together to make research accessible to the public. So they are primarily exhibition galleries that bring together what one might call in shorthand science and art. So that is the nature of the project. Now Bangalore is an outlier in several ways, and that is where the adaptation that Batul was speaking about comes into being. Bangalore is an outlier because we couldn't find a university that would be able to host this project. And what do we mean by that? In India, we do not have what one might consider, or we have very few of what one might consider as universities per se. We have institutions of higher learning, and some of them incredibly good. But architects study with architects, scientists study with scientists, engineers study with engineers, and humanities scholars study with humanities scholars, and artists study with artists. So between the ages of 15 and 17, we herd people out into various disciplines and give them advanced education at a very young, in the very young, creative, formative years of their life, when an engineer has no idea how and why a historian ticks, and an historian has no idea of why or how an artist ticks, and so on and so forth, right? Even an engineer rarely has an idea of how an architect might tick, because our engineering institutions rarely ever have architecture. So these silos have serious consequences, to which I'll come later, but the first in my life was that the gallery could not be located on a single campus. And various sort of serendipitous decisions, which I'm happy to discuss later, meant that the government of Karnataka, so effectively, as Mr. Singh will testify, it often what it means is that there is one bureaucrat who's willing to put their power behind the project. And we were lucky in Karnataka to find one such person who decided that the government of Karnataka will be the founding partner for this project, and they signed the agreement with Science Gallery International. So Bangalore, in fact, was the second globally to sign up to the project. King's College London was the first. And then, instead of one, we got 3 academic partners, so 2 science institutions and 1 design institution. So the structure is that there are loose agreements with the science institutions. We sit with, so we sit on the NCBS campus as our building gets ready, and we work closely with the other 2. It's good to hear Rahul speak about the building, because the government, in fact, then gave us 1.5 acres of land. They also gave us our first capital, as in the capital budget, which has now been matched by philanthropy. So it's become what one might call truly a public-private partnership. Now, when I started thinking about this project, as Batul mentioned, I'm a historian of science by training. And to say that here we are putting together a space where art and science will come together felt very incomplete in a way, because these haven't been separate from each other for very long in history. In fact, if you look at the separation between what was, natural philosophy earlier and various practices of what one today calls, art, not necessarily in galleries but also elsewhere, then these have actually worked together over centuries. And the classic example that everyone throws, and because one has to speak only for a few minutes, I'll throw the same example, which is Da Vinci. In, of course, Europe. And we will find similar examples of geometry in temple architecture in India, or you will find various examples that can be brought to bear, where art and scholarship, or art and knowledge in a way, are embedded and together with each other. So I felt that art in many ways was a restrictive idea, and culture probably was a more expansive idea, given that we are trying to create an institution in the public domain that brings creative expression and scholarship together. So among the first things that I did was that when I started building the assumptions that this project should have in order to operate in our context and make sense, was to say that the science for us would mean the human, the social, and the natural sciences, not natural sciences alone, because rigorous, reliable knowledge is produced by all branches of knowledge making. And of course there's a politics to it, but one can come to that later. And therefore then an equally expansive idea of creative expression in culture or through culture. And then experiment, and which is of course the most dynamic part of this equation, because such an institution in India is an experiment. What I'm trying to do is also an experiment, but also the word experiment has teeth in the project, because what we've pioneered now, as a result of wanting to make scholarship and art come together, or scholarship and culture come together. So what I say, our work is to make science cultural, or to make knowledge cultural. Then how does one do it? And what we've pioneered in order to be able to do that is a public lab complex. And I'll come to that, come to explaining more about that in a second. So these are our 3 sort of for lack of a better word, verticals. We work with young adults, so roughly between the ages of 18 to 28. That doesn't mean other members of the public are not sort of welcome to the premises, but our programming is targeted in order to address the concerns of this age group. It helps that India is a young country. The public lab complex, which is an idea that actually comes from history, even though it's actually a future-facing idea, and therefore how does one, in a way, borrow or learn from the past in order to imagine better futures? So I think this is possibly something more to discuss about, and then of course shaping culture via public engagement, which is through exhibitions and research festivals. This is how the science, the culture, and the experiment work. So the public engagement works through the public lab complex. The public lab complex, of course, has 7 experimental spaces, and then the mentorship initiative, which is for young adults. Now let me just say a little bit about my starting point for this, which is that when one thinks of museums, museums are among the first public spaces for knowledge. This is where collections were held, and the public, the researcher, and the objects of research were in the self-same space. So what people are studying, what people are viewing, and what is being studied is in the same space. And I think that is still largely true for art and culture. It's absolutely not any longer, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it has been nature of scientific research has changed, and so it's no longer true for that. So is there a value in bringing back the relationship between the public and objects of research or objects of scientific inquiry, objects of scholarship? And just do remember, please, whenever I say science, I do mean the human, social, and natural sciences, and not the natural sciences alone. And so that was one of my motivating factors. How does one rekindle that relationship in not the self-same way as in the historical past? How does one do that? The second is that we have come to understand professions also in very, very different ways today, also again in a very siloed manner. So the story that I often like to tell, and it comes as a surprise not just for those who are not practicing scientists, but also for practicing scientists, which is that Chandrasekhar Venkatraman, who is this country's only science Nobel laureate, who studied here and lived here and worked here and died here. We've had many who since moved out of the country and were given their prizes and have lived there and often have become citizens of another country. But he was someone who was here, and his prize came in 1930. What most of us do not, what most of us have forgotten is that for the first 10 years of his professional life, he was an accountant by day. And in the evening, there was a public lab where he would go and do his research, and it was for that, the further build-up of that work that he was awarded the prize. And where is that kind of a space today which allows for someone who may or may not be a professional practitioner in any area, be it that of art, be it that of science, be it, in the human sciences? Is there a space that allows someone the serious pursuit of an idea in any domain of study or practice such that they can actually take it to the point where it can be taken to a place where it can be developed further? And so the need for such a space is something that I felt quite strongly when I started out, and hence the experimental spaces. Each of our labs can take about 15 people. So they are medium-sized labs. They're not, they're not small, they're medium-sized labs. So to sort of just give you a quick overview, the public engagement where we do exhibition seasons, we do off-site programming at metro stations, etc. Community initiatives, which of course I can speak to a little later, but these are our labs. There's a nature lab. So again, like you see that they're not disciplinary labs, but they go beyond disciplines. So, what in the age of climate change, what do you want to, what kind of knowledge do we need? And the kind of knowledge we need are the questions that we should be asking of nature, and therefore not necessarily those that are informed by disciplines, but those that arise out of concerns. So similarly, the other labs are also informed by these ideas, and they're not restricted for practitioners by qualification, but actually by the idea they wish to pursue. and mentorship programs for the young adults that I spoke about. The pandemic allowed us to explore and understand that a digital presence is important. It brings to us audiences that are born digitally native. So I mean, someone like me, for example, I accessed the internet first when I was 23. Today, a 23-year-old has seen internet since since before they were born. And therefore, how does one engage the digital natives? What kind of formats speak to them? So we did what might have been India's first fully digital exhibition during the pandemic, and we went on to do 2 more. And out of those exhibitions then came ideas that we are taking forward, and we will be doing digital exhibitions alongside physical exhibitions going forward. One placeholder idea that I want to put right now, which I will come to later or might actually answer if there are questions about, is that we decided in fact to go low tech because of the strong digital divide. Creating creating high tech content that requires either high bandwidth or smart devices to access it beyond the premises of a museum is not going to help us reach everyone who needs to be reached, and therefore tech should be what it is, which is a medium and a tool, and not the deciding factor in what kind of content and what we actually help produce. Our goal, of course, is to provide context and perspective, and therefore that is an important aspect of what we do. So these are the 5 exhibitions we've done up until now. The first 2 were physical, the last 3 were digital. Yeah, and we have very soon our building opening, and we're going to have an exhibition called Carbon. What we do is we work in very close partnership with cultural as well as research institutions. So these are some of the international institutions that we've worked with. Equally, institutions across India. So these are some of the Indian institutions or institutions in India that we've worked with. So the science academies, other museums, the metro, etc. This is what the building is. It's actually quite looking like this now. The last I left it, which was yesterday afternoon. Yeah, so I think this was more or less what I wanted to tell you about the project itself. And I want to end by saying a little more about technology and about how we think about our audiences. So I think the first thing that is important to us as an institution is that no member of the audience is faceless and, in a sense, devoid of any knowledge, right? People come knowing something. It is often not the same thing that you want to share with them, but they come knowing something. So how do you build on that, and how do you create a space that has respect for that? So so pedagogy is not a goal, but engagement is, right? So connecting with our audiences is important, which is also why, how do you create a space which allows people to realize the potential of their own ideas, but also engage with things. So coming back to some of it does bring me back into the technology discussion, which is as follows. So today it's, I think, very difficult to study no matter what it is, whether you're studying political science, whether you're studying history, whether you're studying sociology, or any of the disciplines in the engineering or natural sciences, because you can't any longer teach or understand electoral behavior if you don't understand what Cambridge Analytica and social media has done to electoral politics. You can no longer understand how social relationships are formed if you do not any longer have access to how social media is influencing the way social relationships get organized, networks get organized, etc. We also cannot discuss matters like, for example, important decisions, for example, on new genetic technologies, which we are beginning to confront when we go to hospitals or making choices in reproductive health, gene editing. So as active citizens, when we need to be making decisions not just about what kind of future societies we want, but also what kind of lives we want to lead, there has to be public spaces that allow for that discussion to actually grow. And so that is the nature of an institution that Science Gallery is trying to become, which is one where one needn't understand quantum mechanics, one needn't understand CRISPR-Cas, but one needs to understand the relevance of it to one's own life. And that is an important important goal, and therefore also understanding something that a historian of technology called Melvin Kranzberg, who was a professor at the school where I did my graduate studies, he has a paper about what he calls the laws of technology. One where he says that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And I think that is something that we really, really need to understand. And as public institutions, I think when new technologies present themselves, we of course have seen in the past that new technologies change societies. Print technology did that, sound amplification did that, radio did that, television did that, the internet did that. And we will have similar technologies coming up, and they will reorganize social relationships, they will reorganize politics. New things will happen. But I think one has, the responsibility of cultural institutions like ourselves is to create a perspective on this by allowing our audiences to see what happened when new technologies came. And therefore, what might one anticipate and how might one actually shape those? But also to unpack some of this, and this was a discussion we were having at the lunch table, unpack some of this in order that technologies are not seen as black boxes, or for that matter, like new shiny things where everything and everyone has to somehow now catch hold of it and do something with it. One needn't, right? Because what one needs to generate around them, though, is the capacity to understand and grapple with them. Why have tools that, or how I mean, in the most basic instance, how do you tell that the difference between computer-aided design and digital tools and digital, mechanisms from artificial intelligence? They are not the same thing. And we, as cultural institutions, we need to be able to create those perspectives, because the choice is often not between, the choice is often not to be posed between an old technology and new technology. It is often quite, hilarious. So my first book was about the beginnings of experimental nuclear physics, as a result of which I've, read a lot around it. And this is what we find out, that the nuclear systems, for example, right, like in the United States, are run on 4-inch floppy disks, which is a shocker to everybody who kind of thinks about it. So highly complex systems can run and are still run on very, very old technologies. IMAX theaters run on Palm Pilots, right? So the choice is not, the posing of the question between old and the new needn't be one of upgradation and new. The path forward, so what is it that has to progress? Is it the technology that has to progress where you are? Or is it what you want, the message you want to take through your cultural institution into the public domain? That is the bit that has to progress, right? And the tools will be there. The tools can be found and the tools can be made to do the work that you want to do. Sometimes, not. But in many cases, yes, we are able to do that. So I think also sort of, anyway, because ideas like dystopias around new technologies, they disturb us because they're culturally disturbing ideas. But I think the danger of, for example, something like artificial intelligence being an all-consuming technology is lesser than the danger of climate change doing something sort of fairly dystopic to our existence on this planet. So I think that taking that responsibility very, very seriously is one that that is important, staying away from sort of a gimmickry of sort of doing things so that, oh my God, this is the latest, come see this is the, like Rahul said at the start, Mr. Markey's question, how long should this institution last? Cultural institutions are built to last over time. Their work happens over time, and they need to be taken seriously in the public domain over time. And therefore, our messaging has to be very, very careful. We cannot join the panic, we cannot join the hype. We need to have measured responses to what is changing around us. What we need around us are a society that is informed about technology, but also a society that is able to deal with what they are told about technology. So, yeah, I think I'll just say that the last piece, simply because we had a session about artificial intelligence. That's the newest hype. Now, anyone who does study artificial intelligence today, seriously, they know the limits of artificial intelligence. It is not replicating human capability. Anyone who does it will have anyone who does that work usually has the humility to tell you that these are technologies that enhance human capability. And technologies have always done that, historically. That's what technology does. Technology's presence in human life is not a new one. Technology has been there ever since. And we have, I was cave painting in the children's gallery during lunchtime. Next to it is the archaeology section where she took me, and there are tools there too, right? So technology has been there all the time. What's its place? And therefore, what's the place of new technology is something that we need to spend time in understanding and present to people who are our audiences. We have that responsibility to our audiences. AI approximates things. It is not predictive. It is not decision making. It cannot offer insight as of now. And therefore, we needn't kind of, look at it in that manner. The limits are so strong. The limits are so access to data that is it has access to data that is only digital. Anything that is beyond the digital is not within the purview of AI. And therefore, there's a lot of what one might call real world, which is outside its purview, right? Of course, the digital world is also part of our reality, so I'm not going to draw that sort of untenable binary. So I think caution, carefulness, responsibility is what we carry as cultural institutions. We hold knowledge of the past and of the present in order for future generations to have access to it. What is it that we wish to tell? How well will this present travel into the future? I think that is a responsibility we have, given also that today a large part of content that is being generated is digital, and therefore how well will this digital travel into the future is a responsibility that we have on our shoulders. Because unlike, the kind of history in which I do, which is largely 20th century, there is no paper to easily go back to. So unless somebody's inbox has been downloaded onto a hard drive, you're not going to know what to do with it. And so I think there are questions that pertain to our responsibilities to the present and to the future, that through which one might want to look at the arrival of new technologies in order to carry out our responsibilities in a good way, I think. Thank you.
I'm going to invite Zameer to present. I had not completed Zameer's introduction entirely. As I mentioned, he's an architect and a practicing architect, and Zameer with Ayaz runs Busride Studios. But Zameer has also studied Orientalism at MIT Harvard, and a lot of their thought processes in terms of how they visualize scenarios, I think do get influenced by that, so please.
The only one without a background in museum design and curation, but this has been an it's an unbelievable learning experience. It's been super 2 days. I've been writing notes and really kind of, I think I'm going to take up some design at some point. Okay, so this is the title, Many Million Museums. I think we are in a time where we are seeing many million museums. At some point, these were kind of personal collections. They came out, these little rooms kind of, were open to the public as, cabinets of curiosities, and then slowly these became, kind of the colonial museums which we have inherited actually in some way. And then we go, into what we inherit. It becomes a country museum, a city. You go to the state, and then you go to the city, and then you go to individuals, some famous, some useless, and it's just basically, you're basically got, many million museums, right? So, and of course you have, museums of special interest, which is again, lovely to hear all the stuff, over the last 2 days, basically. Cool. So I'm going to jump in with a semi-colonial kind of pre-museum, form called the Kunstkammer. It was also called the Wunderkammer and the Cabinet of Curiosities, basically. And this is what it looked like. These were, kind of personal collections. They, people kind of went out, collected things. Some of these things were taken. Some of them were requested kindly. And, they kind of formed these little collections. There's a lot of geological, kind of objects in there. The artifacts range from, cultural artifacts of a different culture. And, all these are kind of, a little bit of a symbol of affluence and, kind of access in some way. We've really kind of enjoyed Kunstkammers. We've been kind of, in our practice, we love storytelling. We are very interested in how space can communicate and kind of, also impart knowledge in some way. So this is a small kind of spice cabinet that we had created for a hotel in Goa. Everything was kind of interactive. You'd go up and, you can kind of mix things, you can taste things, and then this was almost like a to your meal in that sense. We were architects and product designers, so that's why, yeah. This is the Bharat Flooring centenary. So this was 100 years of Bharat Flooring. Again, the Kunstkammer, we really kind of felt that, we wanted to put every little object, you can kind of mix and match with patterns and kind of play with, little kind of coloring pigments and things like that, and kind of really kind of, engage with this. This was a traveling cabinet. So the cabinet kind of, went all over India with the, with their exhibition on their history. And of course, it's been a very significant history in that sense. And a little bigger, these are the smokehouse delis that we've designed. We used to kind of, this backbreaking work, we used to draw these. The entire restaurant was drawn, and they became kind of small repositories of small histories of that area. So, we were in various cities. We've done some in Bangalore, we've done some in Bombay, Delhi, Chandigarh. So we've kind of done a bunch of them, and then we ran out of iodex, and we moved on to the next project. Okay, so this is where we're at. We're talking about affluence, access, memories, and anchors. This is what you would collect. You would have some kind of an anchor that reminds you of your time there and of an event. And I'm going to use artifact very loosely. PhDs, please. But it is actually even a piece of information. It could be an object, it could be anything. It's just artifact right now. And then these kind of collections, they didn't remain personal. The personal collections, like palace collections, were open to the public. Public came in and saw this room beautifully kind of set up. This is kind of examples of these cabinets. And there's a lot of natural history in here, especially the exotics. So this is again, you would talk about the age of discovery, early colonial kind of movements, from the 4 or 5, 6 European kind of nations. And these kind of cabinets were kind of open to public. And then you look at the the larger museums. This is the kind of all the colonial museum. I mean, this is of course the British Museum, and all the kind of assembly of loot from all over the world. And what you also see in this museum is just 1%, right? You're talking about 99% of this. Of the artifacts are actually not visible and never, kind of they put into a cycle, but it's a very obscure cycle of just 1,000 artifacts, every year. And of course, this is just an example of how, kind of alarming this situation could be is, the Benin bronzes. These are, I mean, a lot of African artifacts were taken, and some of these artifacts were actually used to document their own histories. And then taken. So in a sense, there are, people in Africa who don't know their history because they don't have the artifacts that documented them. And then of course, there's a lot of, there's a lot of politics right now on returning some of these, and we also have our favorite, diamond over there and stuff. So you're looking at the empire, power and dominion. Under the guise of protection, you kind of accumulate a bunch of artifacts. There's also a kind of a strong move towards conservation and scholarship. So the scholarship, of course, is located where you would, kind of accumulate the artifacts. This kind of a display for a people in that sense. And then we come to, the time of the many millions of museums. We're looking at, events that you want to anchor your memory in. You don't want to kind of make similar mistakes again. These are museums that remind you of those things. You're also looking at a kind of post-colonial, resurgence of information. These are some of the kind of, Houses of Goa, for example, a small museum cut out on a traffic island by Gerard de Cunha, houses some of the loveliest collections of, Mario Miranda drawings, and of course the drawings and measure drawings of homes. And the conflictoriums, there's some very interesting, you're looking at a very small kind of pixel size of museums. There are very particular concerns. The museum is kind of addressing those. And it's really looking at kind of, turning some of your assumptions of artifact on its head. So here, in these kind of things, you would look at personal narratives, a little bit of activism, special interests. You're looking at also a fragmentation. You're looking at a very small kind of, unit of a museum, very intimate and kind of incisive. I'm the non-museum guy talking about future of museums, so just go for it, okay? Okay. We're just wondering about these questions. We keep wondering about this. But for this symposium, we really did wonder, and we went all out. Okay, so one is the decentralized museum. I mean, do we need a big location to have everything in? Or, we're also looking at, just to give you an example, if there was a small, teacup, ceramic teacup, and it was part of a state collection, and that teacup also had an inscription on it, which had a significance on the history of something, or maybe gender, right, in that time. Okay, so it has a significance of that kind, and it is also a kind of piece of technology that, has significance in that sense. Can it exist in 3 places at the same time, right? So of course we talked about the digital museum and digital twins and kind of moving things out of the central facility. But yeah, what if artifacts could exist in multiple locations? And you're also looking at the possibility that there will be new scholarship around these artifacts, and to be able to update and augment the complete narrative around these artifacts, you will have to kind of in some way create these its location in multiple kind of places. This is political, but we can chat about it. What if artifacts could return to the place of origin and context? I mean, and have digital twins staying back, and that would be so kind. This was just a kind of example. It'll make a huge difference to all the peoples of the world. And kind of also the an argument for digitizing, and we are also talking about even in yesterday's sessions we looked at a lot of outreach. We're looking at museum on wheels. We're going out and kind of engaging a larger audience in that sense. And of course the digital twins would be a very easy way of kind of accessing this thing. And we also have huge repositories in all the free pods over the world. Digitizing some of these, kind of archives which are just kind of completely invisible. There are millions and millions of, artifacts here that would string all the best stories in the world, So have them all digitized and put out. This is actually where they exist, in similar facilities all over the world. We had a chance to kind of just work on some of these, this was a project with Creative Dignity and Avinash Kumar from Antariksh Sanchar. He had already worked on some of these objects, and he had actually, with photogrammetry, documented the Gopurams. Really it was about, how to experience these Gopurams in a different way in the digital medium. And we really wanted to see, some of the digital conversions are actually kind of virtual spaces similar to, that follow the similar grammar to the museum itself. So you have corridors and you have, artwork on it, on the walls, and you in some way are navigating a similar space, but digitally. What we were actually keen on kind of, some of the immersive art from yesterday, that was lovely to see that, there's a possibility to, enjoy these artifacts in different ways. And this is what we had created, and it was all a fly-through, and this was also a lockdown project, so really we were all, working remotely on the project. So, this is something that we've been working on just like that. Because we like to, this is a museum of alternate history. There are lots of, could-haves and should-haves in history, we just feel that maybe some of those extrapolations could be wonderful to have in a museum space as well. So, if there were prolonged engagements between Buckminster Fuller and Gira Sarabhai, what could this have, kind of led to in some way? I won't get into some of the details, but we're looking at kind of a calico dome that is that has all the expression of kind of two powerhouses in that sense, and they just made it independently, unfortunately. What it could do as an installation within the the textile mill itself, and have this lovely collaboration over 6 or 7 months talking about synergetics and kind of local cloth. Similar kind of speculations around if Nehru had put his foot down and asked Corbusier to do a bottom-up research for Chandigarh and not be obsessed with the car, maybe what we could have had is some beautiful Corbusian design of wheelbarrows, or it's just things. This could be so wonderful to have as an artifact in a museum. And also what the village well could be like, imagined if Corbusier had his hand at it. Similar kind of interested in villages, less interested in monuments. It would have been a very different Chandigarh. So the grammar of what if, that is the kind of what we've been asking about. The Museum of Layered Narrative, we do feel that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of layering, there's so much kind of coming up now. It's going to be, any museum will need to be augmented. It'll need to have something that will kind of update, in some way. We were really keen. We've been working on the Taj Mahal for a while now, but we were really keen on how we could kind of layer some of these narratives. The narratives about its, the kind of constellations, the geometries. These all stories that are not visualized. How the whole process of the making, the drawings, and also some of the opium-induced visions that were kind of related to the Taj Mahal. And it would be fun to have this as part of your kind of tour of the museum. The grammar of untold stories. They're told, we just need to access them. This is the last section. This is the recombinant museum. This one, we're really feeling that, now just take it with a pinch of salt. I've heard a lot about AI and all, but we're just thinking that, I mean, while I was studying, I would access 4 papers, I would have, 15 books, you'd have a bunch of things that you'd, kind of bring together, you'd, work out, and you'd have a kind of scholarship that would come out from that whole experience. And if this whole kind of curation could be, run on kind of machine learning, and we could kind of see if, there are access to so much more, kind of information, and if that could kind of, create newer ways of curating. This is just a image prompt. It doesn't really mean much, but it's just that within the space itself, you have, kind of things that are mapping and connecting as a network. You're kind of, part of a larger web. In some way, the, post-colonial 50 years, we had a humanist kind of bent, and lots of scholarship was revised, and we were kind of looking at that. And now we're looking at climate change and social equity, so it's not like it's gone. It's just we need to kind of look at augmentation of spaces with this in mind. So yeah, cool, done. Thank you.
I'll invite Dr. Phalkey back onto the stage so we can have a discussion. A lot for us to think about. But Jahnavi, my first question is something which is about your institution, but which I'm aware of, but I'd like the audience to also learn a little bit more. It's about how you look at co-curation, co-creating, because that's one of the bedrocks of your institution also, in terms of how you look at every season, because every season is done. So if you can just tell us a little bit more about it.
Research festivals rather than exhibitions, and that's probably where some of the method of curating is embedded. Now, since you started with the Wunderkammer, I'm also going to do the same thing, which is to start with where, and I'm sure most people in this room are already aware, but as we know, curation was essentially at some point care for the objects that were in the museum, right? It wasn't about exhibition display, it was really about caring for what you had, caring for the knowledge it embodied, and making it again accessible for future researchers, for public display and other things, right? So the curator the curator held the knowledge of the collection. We have moved far from that. I mean, curation now has become anything between sort of someone actually making an intellectual argument through assembling several kinds of pieces to, simply collecting things and displaying them, or brokering in a way, right? Because especially in the art world, the boundary between art collection and art display is blurred often at times. So it's also then become one about brokering. And I think it's in that fuzziness that we kind of lose what is, what might be held on to is for us, especially as publicly aimed, public sort of institutions for the public. So what we do with every season is that we begin with an open call, where one step back. About 18 months in advance of any research festival or exhibition season, we begin with an idea that might drive, and that idea, we usually like to look at it as something that is of interest. It's an idea that is of interest for scholarship. It's an idea of interest that is for society. So if you look at the previous ones we've had, or the one which we are going to open our building with, which is called Carbon, we had something on psyche, we had something on contagion during the pandemic, etc. So ideas that hold things together, right? Knowledge, culture, practices, research, all of that, right? So where is it that we converge? Because life is like that, where things are not separated. And so how do you, so we begin with that idea, then we write an open call. We invite submissions from across the world. We often work with what we call academic advisors. Academicism is number people who are engaged in research, no matter where they are based at. And then we work with them, and sometimes we also invite curatorial advisors, and then the entire team is also on the curatorial. So it's effectively my programs team, myself, 1 to 2 curatorial advisors, and up to 3 academic advisors. So that's the team that decides what goes into the exhibition, right? So everyone gets one vote, essentially. And everyone has to argue for what they are voting for. And that's where the exhibition begins. We of course identify gaps, and we call upon invitations, etc. But the other thing that we do once this process is settled is that we take every exhibit and we do what I call cracking it open. And we crack it open at 2 ends. So at the first end is the creative process that is behind the making of that object, be it historical, be it a work of art, be it an installation. We're fairly agnostic to disciplines, to formats, to everything, right? So if it's a work of art, and I'll make it concrete because in abstract it sounds quite mad, we lay open the creative process behind the making of what is on display through. So we call it sort of process, and that's included in the exhibition, in the physical exhibition. And we also hold master classes and workshops with the people who are displaying, be they scholars or artists or both, in order for our young audiences to understand what went into its making and why is the knowledge behind the making of this particular artifact or work of art reliable. We also crack it open at the other end to ask new questions of it. Some of them are speculative, and I'll come to the speculative piece as well, and some of them are more by way of how can this be made about the everyday, right? How can this? So I'll give you one example. We had one exhibit called Terra Mars, which was made by a Chinese-American artist. What he had done was, he had created an algorithm, neural network learning process, to transpose the topographical data of Earth onto Mars and Mars onto Earth. And they were displayed in a darkened room, one side Earth turned into Mars and other side Mars turned into Earth. His starting point was a relatively simple one. Well, simple not. I mean, the point he wanted to make was that we are looking for water on Mars when we are destroying water on Earth, and Earth and Mars had started from a similar trajectory, in the larger cosmos, but Mars went another way, Earth went another way. And so you see that, you arrive into a darkened room, you see a blue planet whose topography is not familiar to you, and you see a red planet whose topography is. So it's a moment of sort of reckoning in a sense. What we did was we made that the process by which the algorithm then made the transmission possible, pretty much pixel by pixel, we made that visible on another screen. The other thing we did was we organized 3 workshops on this very exhibit. One was about data scraping. So what kinds of data about water are available for us to access free in the open domain? How do you judge it? How do you assess it? How do you access it? Right? So as a person who's, irrespective, you're an artist, you're an architect, you're a historian, you're a water activist, you're a hydrologist. So we had young people in that room who learned what kind of data about water was available, how do you judge it, discern it, and to what ends could it be used. The second workshop we organized was on aerial mapping of water. So where our young folks learned how to read aerial maps of water, existing aerial maps of water, but also how to make them. So we brought in drones, and they went and mapped, and there's a nala behind the place where we have the exhibition. And so they mapped it and they learned how to read it. So what does it mean to do this kind of work, right? So that was the second. The third was the speculative one, where we got a fluid dynamicist and a science fiction writer. We put them in the same room and we said, you're starting with 20 young people, and we said your starting point is there's water on Mars. So the fluid dynamicist would speak about the properties of water and therefore what happens to it, when, obviously it's speculative, but Mars has particular, qualities, so, what about the forces of gravity, etc., all of that, right? Like, so she brought that knowledge, and the science fiction writer was pushing them to kind of create speculative scenarios, right? So they spent they spent a lot of time kind of just discussing completely insane things, and we had very sort of fabulous responses from the young people in the end saying, I didn't know there was a field like astrobiology. One young person who was an architect, I mean, you know, architects, you guys like to draw, they drew panels, right? Like they literally drew a 4-panel story based on the conversations they had. And so similar, so on and so forth, right? So we do this with every single exhibit. And then we organize around it the second layer. So the first layer is this. The second layer is public lectures, where, for example, during Contagion, which was another season, we had 28 lectures, which included everyone from epidemiologists, vaccine makers, vaccine activists, historians, people who discuss the energy, contagious nature of energy on the dance floor, contagious nature of laughter, computer viruses. So how do ideas and behaviors and things transmit from, you know, becoming something larger? So we had these range of people from different disciplines speaking to the same idea of contagion, right? And therefore, to a young person who sort of saw, wow, I'm interested in this, but this is a historian speaking, that's a filmmaker speaking, that's a this one speaking, that's a that one speaking, and then they might come to 1 or 2 or 3, but over time when they come again and again, what they realize is that there's reliable knowledge produced from different disciplines about the self-same thing. And, you know, how do you approach that, right? So, what do you learn from that? And what we do is we organize also tutorial sessions with the speakers for the young to have like an intergenerational conversation, I know. And then we have a film festival around it, then we have performances, we have games, so we look at open source video games, but also develop games ourselves, board games as well. And the last thing that we do, you know, just 2 more things that I want to say. But performances, what do I mean? When we did the exhibition on water, we invited Rahul Ram, the lead vocalist of Indian Ocean, the band Indian Ocean, to speak. Now he holds a PhD in toxicology from Cornell. So he spoke, and after which he was an activist with the Narmada Bachao Andolan, after which he formed the Indian Ocean Band, where primarily their songs come from folk songs in central India, which are about rivers and water. So he spoke about the presence of water in his journey individually. People came to listen because he was the lead vocalist of Indian Ocean, and he was able to then say why science and culture are in fact sort of, you know, different facets of the self-same life, right? And the last thing then, what we do is, our team, and I mean, you know, this is the team, right? Like anything between 7 and 10 people. We read a lot, we listen to a lot, we watch a lot while we are making the exhibition. We make all of this available and accessible to our audiences by putting it up online and tagging it, right? So we develop playlists on Spotify, we put out books to read, lists of books to read, as well as what are freely accessible books to read. So things to listen, things to watch, things to read, and things to play. So that if someone gets interested in something, there is immediately material available for them to dive into things, rather than having to kind of, you know, wait to look at things. So this is what, if you ask me to sum up my rather long answer in one sentence, is that we're trying to open as many doors and as many different kinds of doors as possible, so that whoever, if you're a film buff, you come through it, so on and so forth, so that you find your own way into this maze that science or knowledge, actually I shouldn't even, that knowledge and culture form, and then in a way find its relevance in your life in a way that is most meaningful to you. And so the goal of like of now that everyone uses curation in this manner, the goal of curating all of this is to make knowledge about the everyday, and we call it make science culture, right? So that's sort of the approach to curation. So it's a long answer.
No, I think what's interesting. Yeah. So what's interesting for me when I heard about this model was that it allows you to, one is of course think laterally, but always have that curiosity alive. Because often when we are studying science, we all tend to become a bit jaded, a bit bored about it. And this keeps the curiosity alive. And over lunch, I had a very quick conversation with the artist Himmat Shah, who's gone to see the Ganga Ghat just now. But he's a 91-year-old artist who's using material with his hands all the time. And I asked him about the session and what he thought about it. And he said it's great because it keeps your innocence alive for what was happening. And we should always keep on learning. And this is a 91-year-old artist. And I think something like that encourages that among children. And we do a lot of brainstorming with children for our project. And what we are seeing is that by the time a child gets 8, 9 years old with our current educational systems, they start getting jaded or they are completely cornered by peer pressure all the time. So then their answers start falling into slots. They think in the same direction. But something like that opens their mind up. And I think that's something which we are quite looking forward to. And we look forward to the building opening and attending the next season. Zameer, my question is now going to come to you. So, while you've said you're not a museum professional, and we know that, you have designed exhibitions. In your design practice, you all do look at scenarios. And in your Instagram practice, we know that you talk a lot about influences of different things, whether it's about looking at how climate change would affect certain kind of heritage. You look at political scenarios and political policies influencing the built form. So, what are the various current day scenarios you think which are going to be influencing museums as a museum visitor who may enjoy and who may not enjoy museums? What do you think is?
Okay. I'll just respond to what you said earlier. Our process is not as open-ended as Jahnavi's, and kind of we have kind of created a large nodal network of our ideal worldview. So everything's perfect in that worldview. And anything that we see in current affairs or maybe a new scholarship or anything that kind of triggers a move towards one of our nodes, we kind of put it out there. So we get super excited, like damn, this is what's kind of topical, and this seems like this. If you extrapolate, it's going to go there, and it's going to reach one of our kind of ideal points in life. So that's actually it's not a very open-ended process. It's quite kind of we wait till that that correct kind of information comes our way, and then we kind of put it out there. So it's not. It doesn't kind of, maybe it sings a workshop format, but we've not actually, we've not institutionalized it. So,
yeah.
Different responsibilities, right?
So, what's interesting about the scenarios that they create for the Instagram practice is that they look at all the factors which are affecting us, and most of us do get overwhelmed. But it doesn't lead to a dystopian world. Yeah. And I think that's something which is great for everybody who's navigating.
Yeah, our worldview is super happy.
Yeah, which I think is a need of the hour also. So I'm going to open it to everybody who's got any questions. And
I mean, I can ask you a question here. Do you play games when there's a big group of professionals who are in their own right, kind of doing their own work? How do you break the ice, and how do you actually talk collaborative languages with? I mean, between my brother and me, we don't have to do that, but.
Yeah. So the average age of my team is 26. Their mode of work is games.
So they're not jaded.
No, it was very hard to find people. So I mean, as Supriya and Batul will remember, I mean, they were around when I made my first 2 hires. It hasn't been easy because those who come from the sciences come with the idea that they're going to teach us how to do science communication, because I myself come from history of science. I don't come from what is called a straightforward natural sciences background. And those who come from the humanities, often the brightest of them don't want to look at this because this is the word science in it. And so it's actually quite hard to find the right people. I've found my success has been in, or rather not my success, where we have been successful is in finding young people straight out of college. And then they've come, and then of course they come with no work experience, so they have no idea how to work. But they come with an energy, they come without without the same number of preconceived ideas of what it means to work and create things. And they're literally, their day-to-day modus is play. So they are always drawing, sketching, so that's why I often suggest very sad names for the, so I keep saying, we will not have an office, we'll have a studio. It will be a Science Gallery Bengaluru studio. And then I said we have to have a name for it. So I once suggested Banana Studio, like banana being Hindi banana, matlab haath se banana, or dimag se banana, banana studio. Huh? And they of course looked at me like they rolled their eyes and how, and they were like, please, like no such sad names. But that's the thing. Yes, so play is a very important part. They go apart from sort of the daily way of work, into which they also drag me sometimes. They also go and play themselves elsewhere, like, you know, including whatever those things, the paint gun thing, the escape room, the whatever. So it's a very, and the design, people who come with a background in design give the others a lot of confidence to actually work with their hands and do things. So then they're also changing positions a lot of time. So people who are doing something else today go into production tomorrow. Production guys say, I'm tired of this, I'm going to do something else tomorrow. And I've left them open. I've left it open-ended also for them. I'm glad you picked up that word. It is meant to be open-ended. I just tell them, as long as the work is getting done, I'm not going to tell you either how to do it or that this is strictly your role. But as a team, you have to deliver this, right? And so far, so good, touch wood. I mean, with 5 research festivals, we've done okay so far, yeah.
Can we pass the mic?
Okay, I'm not allowed to ask a question for Jahnavi, so really, Zameer. I like your presentation very much, and specifically also like first that you drew the attention from the exhibition to the collections, and then also your idea of the dispersed museum, because I also very much enjoy that, and I think this is also something specifically to talk about like the Indian context, right? Like we need something, and I would probably not talk, I mean the dispersed, but also the network museum, right? Like museums as networking between different, instead of having like huge national museums, which also obviously have their function, and we also see the lack of that function in many ways in India, right? Like we don't have a British museum, right? Like the British museum obviously has a lot of Indian artifacts, but obviously a lot of these artifacts are also co-created. I mean, I could go into some through the colonial context, right? Like through the colonial context. So it's much more about having a dialogue and a dialogue of our past, right? Like, but also having the kind of possibility of having access to these kind of objects and to display them in different kind of contexts, but also like for me as a historian specifically, having them available as a resource, right? Like to think about and openly have a discussion about history, but a history that is actually based in objects, in archives. I think somebody mentioned the importance of archives as well, right? So I think that's a very important thing. Think about not only the exhibits, but also thinking about the collections as material evidence, right? Like to the past and the importance of making these objects and making, I don't know, archival documents accessible to researchers, but not only to researchers, but also to broader publics. Right? Yeah. I don't know whether you want to comment on this.
No, I mean, I think when I was asked to kind of talk here, the first thing was that, there's so much emergent scholarship always going to, kind of be there. You're going to, if you really look closely with the microscope at one of these seals, you might find clues on an urbanity. There will be, so promises there. And that if this exhibit exists in an urban, urbanism kind of an exhibition, it's going to add value there, and its metallurgy is also going to add value to some other, maybe the amount of extraction of ore in the time of, Ashoka. That's the first thing I'm thinking about, because the stories is what excites me. And that if these stories are lost because it's in one place, then it makes no sense. So then it needs to have a twin, and maybe this goes on around and visits all the places, but and comes back to a safe, kind of keeping. But it needs to be kind of in different places at different times. I mean, you'll never have better scholarship if these objects are kind of kept in within very controlled narratives. So.
If I may add to that, I think that's where the thing that you said about layered, right? I think layered is to me that's actually very important, and this is something I hope that with Carbon we succeed in doing, which is that you can evoke those objects and those stories where you are, rather than sort of make an object of display sanctimonious. You build layers around it with various things, right? Like you can bring other objects, you can bring works of art, you can bring books, you can bring a range of things that allow for that object to realize within the limits and constraints that you set for it, right? But to always render it a little more than what in a sense, siloed scholarship and siloed institutional practices have allowed objects to become, right? I think that layered, the word layered is really important. And how do you make those layers of interpretation accessible to the public, right? Like such that then they begin to believe that their own interpretations matter. Because it's only when they participate in interpretation that, in a way, your voice, right? Like after they've gone out. Otherwise, dekh liya khatam.
I guess model museums do need to allow multiple voices to come forward, and what you said, that because you allow interpretation, because you allow that is possible, and that of course comes from access. So yes, how much can you allow and how, and maybe again technology plays a role there, because how do you zoom in, and can 30 scholars study the same object at a given time, and it's possible to do that now. So it is possible.
I have a logistic related question for Jahnavi, but I just kind of like, it's a long-winded. So museums tend to look at themselves as custodians, right? There's a keeper of knowledge and then there are receivers of knowledge. And these are public institutions, so that approach is the old-fashioned approach, but it is the approach, right? And when we asked some questions in this presentation, which was about what happens to that knowledge in the future. How can we look at this knowledge, can it be decentralized, who are the keepers of knowledge, right? And Symposium is called the future is now, and I feel like your presentation was very interesting because I feel like you are answering a lot of questions that you're posing in the nature, the way in which it functions, because you've taken knowledge and you have decentralized. It's now open, it's open-ended, audiences are bringing knowledge in. So the process of creating knowledge has gone from the museum and the historian to now the public. Logistics related, right? So how do you ensure that this idea lives on after you? And second thing is that this is a government-funded institution. This is a much-needed institution, but it is a government-funded institution. How do you get the buy-in? How do you continue that support, and what happens to it? Because it is needed.
So, this term called mission creep, right? So, I think what I've done is I've maintained fidelity to the mandate, which is one of bringing scholarship into the public domain while bringing art along with it, right? Like or culture, as a more broadened understanding of art as a larger creative expression in culture. So I look at it as this is what it takes to deliver this idea 15 years after the original exhibition only idea, especially in India, but quite frankly beyond India. If you look at what's happening today, even in the United States and in the United Kingdom, and if you look at the anti-vaxxer protests in Europe as well, I think this is now necessary everywhere. So the ambition is very much to Well, I would really like us in India to create a model for a public space for knowledge that is relevant for these times, right? Like so, and which is also why creating these various formats and baking it into the DNA of what happens in a Science Gallery Bengaluru Research Festival, which is centered on an exhibition. Once you bake it in, I think some of it cannot be taken away. Some of it cannot be. Some of it maybe. One doesn't know, right? The team lives on. I mean, it's seldom that the entire thing gets wiped out, so I'm hoping that will not happen. But of course, I mean, I'm aware that people come and go. The archive of each of these exhibitions, which is why we've consciously right now not gone for catalogs but actually gone for documentation, is to also give flesh to that idea and say, here's a 300-page document of the Contagion exhibition, season, research festival. These are the many things that happened. This is how it happened. This is the activity handbook. These are the exhibits. These are the workshops. This is the lecture. This is the film. This is the discussion. This is the these are the 500 resources. So once you generate probably 10 such things, it becomes less easy to move away from it. But then another door opens up, which is that, say for example, now, I mean, as they say, my good luck, you guys were involved in the project, right? You see why this idea, in a way, develops on how we've been doing exhibitions otherwise. You will mention it to somebody. And I think in the final say, the success of this model lies in its ability to create in other institutions a desire to do research festivals in this way, right? Where every object not every object, but because I mean we do up to 30 objects. In a museum often there are millions of objects. But you put together an exhibition and then in that every object is opened up in this way, right? Like, I think that will be its success, right? When the idea infiltrates into the cultural domain where we begin to see the responsibility, as I keep saying, of what it means to hold the knowledge, but also to then make sure it is fed back into the public domain to those who did not have access into its making. That kind of ensures that that idea will continue. So I think it's fine that it gets tweaked. I mean, in its use, it will find value. So that's kind of the thing. And I mean, we are a public institution. I mean, I believe strongly we're a public institution. We are right now partly funded by the government, right? Like, so half of the capital came from the government, half of it came from philanthropy. For our operations, 1/3 comes from the government, 2/3 comes from philanthropy. So it's a balancing act, but it also allows you then to, for no one to have a bigger say than the other, right? So that's also, I mean, of course, it's a tricky one. It's never easy because these are both extremely powerful forces. And I'm at the end of the day an employed museum director. I come neither from, I'm not a, what is it called? A high net worth individual or like Mr. Singh, a bureaucrat of very high standing. But there are other things I bring to it, and hopefully those will carry me through the first, well, I mean, 10 years probably, and then after that, maybe the things need to change anyway.
We are also making a science museum in the main problem that I face, and I confess, when we plan for programming and something, when we plan for activities or exhibition, who is deciding? I'll give you an example like this Biennale. What happened? It came to my mind that we should get 2 countries from Latin America, 2 from Africa, and 4 Indian museum, 4 foreign museums. So the decision, somehow that process I find, especially because I want to broad base now. Because I'm not asking my client and I'm not going in discussion what exactly they want to see. That is one part. Second, in our science museum, when we were making that, when they said that there will be these 5, 6 labs, and we want to make agriculture very important. But when I asked, have you discussed with farmers? They consulted everybody, all great experts of India, and everybody gave input. This would happen like this would be the room size, this would be the equipment.
Yeah.
Then they said no. Similarly, I asked, have you gone to high schools and talked to the boys and girls? But they also have some lab, some type of lab. So what more knowledge or information and how they want it, and then that level, how you are going to give that. And also said that they can come for 2 hours, they will not really, because I cannot. If I go in a lab for 2 hours and then go back, that's why I insisted on making a hostel. So now I have a hostel. So I said, no, if they will come for 3-4 days.
Yeah.
They may take that time.
Yeah.
So our problem, we are thinking that we are getting experts, we decide.
Yep.
That I don't know how to broad base it and
Yep.
how to go to the client. In this museum, one good thing happened, because they were our museum planners. So all the stakeholders were given sufficient time. They take 15 days discussion with historians, school students, children, street children, different type of intellectuals.
Yeah.
And then some type of consensus came.
Yeah.
But my activities, especially in programming, now I am going to make it broad. Ultimately, why I am deciding, or why a very small group of people,
Yeah.
or something I am going and seeing in Metropolitan or MoMA or somewhere, or a science museum. Recently I went to New York, I was very impressed. That Natural History Museum
Yes.
or something. Beautiful display.
Yes.
So the first thing is, copy, to do something like that. But now I am asking, because I am in India, I am in Bihar, so I should do something else.
Yeah.
But there then you don't need that great expert. You have to go and work little hard. That I am planning to do. That is my one comment.
Thank you. Very quickly, I think this is, your experience has filtered down to me through Batul and Supriya, right? Because they would talk about what it has meant to do this space. And so, coming back to how I think of it, of course I've tried to broaden the decision-making process more than the 2-person or 3-person curatorial team, or myself being a large part of it, by having this larger team. And also making sure it's across ages, because my young team is a part of it. And it's a global open call, so anyone who's interested is at least open to submitting an application. So that, in a way, ensures, to begin with, a relatively broader, not necessarily fully, but a significantly broader base than what you would normally have in a setting of this kind. That having said, at the end of the day, the institution has to run, exhibitions have to run on time, etc. So all of these constraints, logistical constraints that come, them, by far better than I do, those also have to be kept in mind. And so I think, but one more thing that I do want to place here is that opening or that consultation can be embedded in the process of the exhibition and programming itself, right? Where that conversation is one that invites participation from your audience to say, so now tell. And then you get comments like, okay, so we are doing, before Carbon opens in the building, we have right now the parts of the exhibition open at metro stations. So we're getting feedback from people there. What we have also is the mediators, who I forgot to mention. Our exhibitions have mediators. You also have one form of mediation here with young people there. So we also have full-time mediators. They are of the age group that is our target audience. And so they not only bring their own ideas to the table, but they also then talk to people and collect ideas. And so there's a learning debriefing at the end of every exhibition, which we then try to feed into the next one. And I think it is a journey. It will be a while. And I think public participation is also not a thing. I mean, as I used to say in the beginning years, and I'm sure Batul and Supriya will remember this, I used to say, whatever, कुछ भी हो, ये दर्शन कराने वाली जगह नहीं होनी चाहिए कि लाइन में आ गए दर्शन करके चले गए. That is what should not be there. People should come back again and again, engage with what has been made for them, and participate, interpret, create themselves, right? And that's why the thrust on the masterclasses, the workshops, the experimental spaces, activity room, reading room, range of things In fact, our reading room will have lots of board games and things like that, right? Like Lego, Yebo, Sapuch, and also literally like, the pandemic, Monopoly, whatever, all of those things. So I think so in some law, I tend to give long answers, it's a lecture. But I think the program itself can become participating. And then I think over the years, other things will come, and then there'll be other leaders who, won't keep problem in the solve. but that's another way of actually still making sure the audience finds their voice and finds their place in the program.